From the book of Samuel, chapter 1, verses 9 through 11, 19 through 20, and chapter 2, 1 through 10. Once when they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli the priest was sitting on a chair by the doorpost of the Lord's temple. In bitterness of soul, Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord. And she made a vow, saying, O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. Early the next morning, they arose and worshipped the Lord, and then they went back to their home at Ramah. Elkanah lay with Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. So in the course of time, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son. She named him Samjuel, saying, because I asked the Lord for him. Then Hannah prayed and said, my heart rejoices in the Lord my horn is lifted high. My mouth boasts over my enemies, for I delight in your deliverance. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. Do not keep talking so proudly, or let your mouth speak such arrogance, for the Lord is a God who knows, and by him deeds are weighed. The bows of the warriors are broken, but those who stumbled are armed with strength. Those who were full hire themselves out for food, but those who are hungry hunger no more. She who is barren has borne 7 children, but she who has had many sons pines away. The Lord brings death and makes alive. He brings down the grave and raises up. The Lord sends poverty and wealth. He humbles and he exalts. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. He seats them with princes and has them inherit a throne of honor. For the foundations of the earth are the Lord's. Upon them he has set the world. He will guard the feet of the saints, but the wicked will be silenced in darkness. It is not by strength that one prevails. Those who oppose the Lord will be shattered. He will be thundered against them from heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about Hannah's prayer that we find in 1 Samuel. And I love the children's message. Like, that was perfect. I think I needed that when I was a child, because prayer was always this powerful thing to me, but it didn't always seem to happen. And I remember one, maybe emotional one. My grandmother had a stroke, and I prayed fervently that she would be healed. And, she passed away. And that was just almost detrimental to my prayer life. And so I spent time almost avoiding prayer at all costs. And then through work with counselors and very dedicated people in my life, I started praying gratitude prayers. And so there was this element of thanking God, and maybe not asking God for things so much. But then once I got to the point of asking things, and I didn't ask Mallory to share this, but I prayed for a wife and kids. And I've got 2 ornery boys and a wonderful wife. But this gratitude kept coming in, and God's leading on every step of my life has been something I've come to know in faith, that God hears the prayers. May not answer them all the time like I would like them to be answered, but God hears. And we'll see that today in our story. So from Exodus, we jump through some books of the Bible, and we jump ahead to the book of Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel. But Samuel is not our main character today. Samuel seems to take a background, or maybe not even a position in our story today, except for the very end. And he's not really a spotlight. He is the evidence of God hearing. So 1 Samuel opens up with 2 wives of this guy named Elkanah. Elkanah? Right? We're close, right? And so Hannah and Peninnah. Peninnah? Peninnah. Wonderful names, right? Well, they don't quite get along. So we open up this story of 1 Samuel with kind of a bad marriage. Not only does the guy have 2 wives, but the wives that he does have, they don't get along. Hannah is barren. She's not able to have kids, and his other wife, the one that starts with a P, she is blessed by God, the culture would say, being able to have children. And so we got this element of friction already at the start of 1 Samuel, and our guy Elk is just trying to get along in the midst of this. But even he's not our main character, right? He takes this passive role. But Hannah is inundated with this taunts and insults from her fellow wife, and the Hebrew word translated in verse 6 as rival to describe Peninnah can also mean rival wife. So our guy Elk has a mess on his hands. And not having kids in Israel would have likely made Hannah feel depressed, and though her life was probably meaningless at this point. Women's roles in that ancient society were limited, but childbearing was a huge thing, and to not be able to accomplish this, Hannah was just down completely. To sum it up, Hannah was insulted daily, dealing with societal pressure, and depressed about her infertility. She was so brokenhearted that nothing could reach her. And she couldn't even receive her husband's kindness. And we almost see that our guy Elk likes Hannah better. But she wasn't able to grasp even that. She wasn't eating. She was weeping. Nothing was good. And their family took a yearly visit to the temple at Shiloh, and Hannah seems to have had enough. If you haven't caught on, Hannah's our main character, right? Nothing is working, and she has had enough. She weeps bitterly, pours her heart and soul out to God, crying so hard that Eli thinks that she's drunk. He was the local priest at this time. After Hannah explained to Eli that she was weeping and not drunk, she was praying out to God, he told her, "Go in peace, and the God of Israel will grant your petition that you have made to him." And she wiped her tears and went away. She prayed fervently to God to answer her prayer. I don't know about you all, but this kind of resonates with me, this fervent prayer. This element of pouring out one's heart to God and in such a personal way to call out to God, Yahweh. That's a name that does not get talked about. You know, we see in our Bible the capital letters Lord. That was to replace the name Yahweh, because Yahweh was such a holy word that it said that not even the priest would write Yahweh. They would write this Lord, but even writing this Lord to represent Yahweh was such a special moment that they would take out a special quill. And this quill was holy in itself, writing this word Yahweh. And they would dispose of this quill because it was so holy that they could not use it again. And Hannah uses this personal, holy word to call out to God. Yahweh, my breath, my life, Yahweh, answer my prayer. Soon afterward, Hannah got pregnant. The prayer was answered, and she gave birth to a son, and Hannah was so exuberant in God's help that she named her son Samjuel, which sounds like the Hebrew word for heard of God. Every time she would say her son's name, she would be reminded of God's help. So some things stand out about our main character, Hannah, in this story. You know, Hannah is the only Old Testament woman who is said to go to the Lord's house, to the house of Yahweh. Hannah is the only Old Testament woman to make a vow to God, to Yahweh. Hannah spoke God's name, Yahweh, more than any other woman in the Old Testament. Hannah called herself God's servant 3 times in her prayer. And this number 3 is significant because we've got the Trinity, we've got completion, we've got 3 times. This shows humility, but also commitment to God. And most remarkably, I think, is that Hannah seems to know God more intimately than the local priest Eli did. Hannah knew God better than her pastor. Isn't that something? Hannah knew God better than her pastor. Actually, we've got some reasons to think that this is true. I mean, Eli was a decent priest, and we'll learn more about him later in Samuel, but he had a rough family too. His sons were not known as the greatest priests. They bribed and lied, and, well, they were not good people. So Eli's kind of failing a little bit on that scale. But Eli used the formal name for God, the God of Israel. Now, granted, this was probably more priest-like, but Hannah used God's personal name, Yahweh. While Eli sat at the door of the tabernacle, more than likely asleep, to let a woman pass through to God's inner sanctum, right? Hannah went in, presented herself to God to share her whole heart. When Eli couldn't see past the surface of Hannah's prayer, thinking she was drunk, Hannah corrected Eli and humbly asked God for help. Hannah is our example. Hannah went so far as to bargain with God. I don't know about you all, but I've been there. And God blessed her for it. Maybe it's reminiscent of some of our story from last week. Hannah's prayer was answered, and Samuel will come to play through the rest of our Samuel books, but it's not his story today. Hannah is the one who drives the action. It's her voice we hear more than any other. She is the subject to the key verbs. Hannah refuses comfort, waits, prays, insists on her prayer in the face of priestly rebuke, and ultimately conceives, bears, and even names her son. Hannah is a powerful character in our story. Hannah's song, then, becomes our interpretive key to the whole narrative. It reminds us to hear it as the story in which God is active, in spite of the horrors before and the horrors to come. It's a startling turn of page to our books that we kind of skipped over here, the book of Judges, for example. Israel was in a mess. And we come to Hannah's story and we see God at work in a positive way. Hannah seems to lay it out for Samuel in such a way that God is working and God works through Samuel in so many different ways. Judges ends in a mess. And then Samuel empowers women's agency. The opening book of Hannah's prayer, which brings Samuel onto the scene and changes the course of Israelites' history. Hannah's action in defiance of religious authority to make her prayer in the sanctuary and subsequently to dedicate Samuel to Nazirite service sets a powerful tone for our books of Samuel. He grows into this key figure because of Hannah. It's he who transitions Israel from the chaos of the judges into the period of relative stability of kings, right? There's some stuff to work out. As a theologian observed, Hannah and Samuel present this stark contrast as a parent-child pair to the subsequent story of Eli and his faithless sons that we see in chapter 2. God works with the underdogs. I don't know how well that works for the Chiefs game today. But God is at work, and God hears, powerfully hears. Hannah's prayer has often been considered a theological key for interpreting the books of Samuel insofar as it introduces the themes of God bringing down the mighty, like our first king Saul, and raising up the lowly, like our second king David. Even though it's wonderfully fraught with human decisions and human people, God bringing down the mighty and raising up the lowly and downtrodden are divine action. But in so much that it's not just divine action, but God allows us to interact with the story as Hannah does. I can't help but wonder, if it wasn't for Hannah, would we have the stability that we see in the Bible? The theme later echoed in the Song of Mary found in our Gospel Luke is that God will bring down the powerful and raise up the powerless. We see Mary echo Hannah's song of praise. And this powerful element that God works by not overt rule, but through messy, flawed, halting lives of us. And I think that's the power of prayer. That's the power of God's ways. And we see in Hannah this wonderfully beautiful person coming to God, pouring their heart out. Save me, Lord. Save me, Yahweh. God's ways of doing things may seem strange to us at times, turning things on their head, the upside-down kingdom. But it's God's ways of doing things that bring the whole community into action. Prayer is powerfully heard. Prayer is powerful. And through God's ways, prayer can change the world. Praise be to God.